The Himalayas are like no other mountains on Earth. An immense, jagged spine of stone and ice stretching nearly 1,500 miles across the roof of Asia. Formed by the relentless collision of tectonic plates, where the planet's forces continue to push whole continents upward inch by inch. Here, everything feels scaled up. Ridgelines, vertical cliffs, glaciers that carve valleys thousands of feet deep. What makes this region unique, though, is not only the geography, but the remarkable patchwork of cultures and religions woven through it. Hindu shrines sit in valleys where local animist traditions still guide daily rituals. Tibetan Buddhist monasteries crown ridges above Nepali villages. The Himalaya are a collection of worlds. Languages, beliefs, and customs separated sometimes by only a ridge or a river. Often called the roof of the world for its towering mountains and elevated plateaus, Ladakh occupies one of the most dramatic landscapes on Earth. It stretches across valleys and plateaus at elevations ranging from 9,000 to over 18,000 feet, where the air is thin and the climate unforgiving. A cold desert with very little rainfall. Summers are brief but bright, winters long and bitter. And temperature swings can be extreme even during the day. Among this harsh, rugged wilderness, Nubra Valley stands out. A place where the Indus River and its tributaries carve fertile oases from the otherwise stark terrain. Meltwater from glacier-fed threads lays out long green ribbons of willow and sea buckthorn across a landscape that otherwise looks too dry to support anything. Along the valley in the middle of Rocky Mountains hides a patch of sand dunes. Not warm tropical ones, but pale, fine, almost skeletal. They're remnants of an ancient lake bed, reshaped by the Shyok River as it shifted over time. Bactrian camels, two-humped survivors of the old Silk Route, still graze around the edges. Their ancestors carried salt, wool, and turquoise towards Central Asia. Today, they carry visitors for short rides, a small nod to the valley's trading past. A little farther north sits Diskit, the largest settlement in the valley. Above it, on a rocky ridge, stands Ladakh's oldest surviving monastery. For centuries, the monastery watched over the trade route that threaded its way towards Central Asia. Its whitewashed buildings are scattered across a sandstone hill, following the contours of the rock. Across the ridge stands the 100-foot statue of Maitreya Buddha, completed in 2010. Though modern, its symbolism is rooted in centuries of tradition. The statue faces west, toward the border with Pakistan, deliberately placed as a gesture of peace in a region shaped by geopolitics. Nubra Valley is connected to the outer world by Khardung, one of the highest mountain passes in the world. Its exact elevation has been debated for years, but it sits at roughly 17,600 feet. High enough that every breath feels a little thinner. Long before road crews carved switchbacks into these slopes, caravans made the crossing on foot and camelback, hauling goods between the Nubra Valley and Leh. Those travellers weren't thrill seekers, they were merchants and messengers, people whose livelihoods depended on navigating this harsh corridor. When the modern road was built in the 1970s, its role shifted from commerce to logistics. For decades, the pass was advertised as the highest motorable road in the world. Whether or not the claim is technically accurate doesn't matter much. What makes Khardung iconic is its character, not statistics. The feeling of being suspended between two very different worlds. As the road winds down from Khardung the air gains weight. Then Leh, the capital of the Ladakh region, slowly comes into view. Overlooking the city from a rugged cliff, Leh Palace, a 9-story structure, was built in the early 1600s by King Sengye Namgyal. Modelled on the Potala Palace in Lhasa, but on a smaller, humbler scale, it was once the political and cultural centre of the Ladakhi kingdom. Abandoned in the 19th century, the fortress is weathered, darkened by sun and sand, but that only adds to its presence. From the upper terraces, we can see the white dome of Shanti Stupa. A monument of peace built in the late 1980s by Japanese and Ladakhi Buddhists. The stupa's design is modern compared to older Himalayan religious structures, with clean lines and a 2-level terrace accessible by a set of stairs. Leh itself has grown steadily over the past decades, driven by tourism, military presence, and improved road access. Yet the historical core around the palace and the main bazaar still reflects its past as a trading town. Many of the old streets follow the same lines used when caravans pass through. About 12 miles southeast of Leh, the Indus Valley widens just enough for a series of villages and agricultural fields to take hold. On a hill above one of these settlements stands Thiksey Monastery, one of Ladakh's most prominent monastic complexes. The monastery belongs to the Gelug school of Tibetan Buddhism and was established in the early 15th century. Over time, additional temples, living quarters, assembly halls and shrines were built as the community grew. The surrounding views provide a clear sense of why monasteries were often built on elevated ground. Partly for defence in earlier centuries, partly for visibility. But also for practical access to sunlight and airflow in a cold desert environment. Near the foothills of the Himalayas, Dal Lake is often called the jewel of the valley. But on the ground, it feels more like a living neighbourhood. A place where people have adapted their homes, markets and routines to the water. The lake covers roughly 7.5 square miles, divided into 4 main basins connected by narrow channels. Dal Lake's most recognisable feature is the houseboat culture. Unlike the floating villages of Southeast Asia, these cedarwood structures began under the Dogra rule in the 19th century. The British, restricted from owning land, started building ornate boats as seasonal homes. Over time, Kashmiri craftsmen developed their own distinctive style. Carved facades, patterned interiors, and long verandas facing the water. The shikara boats, the wooden delivery vehicles of the lake, move quietly through the channels, bringing vegetables from floating gardens. Those gardens, small plots of soil woven from lake weeds, anchored with stakes, are one of Dal Lake's unique inventions. On the border between Pakistan and China, at the northern end of the Karakoram Range, rises K2. At more than 28,000 feet, it's the second highest mountain on Earth. But its identity has never depended on rankings. The name K2 comes from the Great Trigonometrical Survey of the mid-19th century. During the mapping of the Karakoram, peaks were labelled in sequence: K1, K2, K3, and so on. Most later received local names, but K2 never did, at least not one that entered common use. The mountain's climbing history is shaped by high technical difficulty and unpredictable weather. All established routes involve passing exposed ridges and balancing narrow couloirs where small changes in temperature can trigger avalanches. The Baltoro Glacier, a massive ice system stretching more than 35 miles, forms the main approach from Pakistan. Camps are set up along the glacier's upper reaches, where moraine fields create a constantly shifting landscape. To the north, the Chinese side is even more remote. Accessible only through longer, less frequently travelled routes. North of K2, Hunza Valley winds between sharp peaks of Karakoram. At elevations above 8,000 feet, the climate is dry, the summers short, and the growing season brief. Still, the valley is known for its apricot orchards and stone-built villages that follow the contours of the river. Historically, Hunza occupied a strategic position along several branches of the old Silk Route. For long stretches of time, the region remained politically independent. Ruled by local mirs who balanced alliances with neighbouring powers. Many of the older settlements were built on elevated plains or fortified ledges for visibility and defence. Above Karamabad, the main town, stands Bolted Fort. Originally built over 700 years ago and later modified by various rulers, it functioned as a residence and administrative centre. Running along the valley is the Karakoram Highway, one of the region's most significant modern developments. Constructed by Pakistan and China between the 1960s and 1970s, it follows an ancient trade corridor linking Islamabad with Kashgar. The highway required large-scale engineering through unstable rock, steep cliffs, and active fault zones. It is often described as one of the highest paved international roads in the world. But more importantly, it's a key transportation route in the region. For Hunza, the highway changed daily life in practical ways. Travel that once took days or weeks now takes hours. Goods and supplies reach remote villages more easily. And tourism, largely drawn by views of the surrounding peaks, has become a major part of the local economy. Sections have been rebuilt more than once, most notably after 2010, when a massive landslide created a 13-mile lake blocking the route. Few animals are as closely tied to the character of a place as the snow leopard is to the Trans-Himalaya. It is both a symbol and a secret, present yet almost never seen. Snow leopards survive in conditions that test every living thing. Winter temperatures here drop far below zero, and the ridgelines sit at elevations where vegetation thins to hardy shrubs. But this is exactly the environment they are built for. Their dense grey coats mirror the colour of the granite slopes. Oversized paws spread their weight across loose scree, allowing them to climb slopes that feel nearly vertical. In Karakoram, snow leopards follow the rhythms of their prey. Blue sheep, ibex, and smaller mammals scattered across the high-altitude deserts. A single cat may patrol an area larger than some of the villages in the valleys below. Yet despite their range, they remain astonishingly unseen. Even researchers who track them for years often rely only on camera traps and paw prints. Leaving Kashmir, we follow a wide, cold desert carved between ridgelines that stay snow-covered most of the year. Spiti Valley. The name is often translated as Middle Land, a reference to its position between Tibet and the Indian plains. The Spiti River runs along the valley floor, but it's not a lush corridor. Instead, it cuts through gravel and shale. Creating steep banks and narrow terraces. Roads cling to these cliffs, sometimes nothing more than a single-lane shelf carved into vertical stone. For decades, they were only open a few months each year, and even now, closures from landslides and snow are routine. Historically, The valley developed along trade routes linking Tibet to the lower Himalayas. Caravans carried salt, wool and barley, and local monasteries acted as both spiritual and administrative centres. The most prominent of these is Thiksey Monastery. A 1,000-year-old complex perched on a hill above the village of Kaza. Its layered structure, built, rebuilt, and expanded after invasions, earthquakes, and fires, gives it the look of a fortified village. Gangotri, a small town hidden among the peaks of the Greater Himalayan range, holds a place of immense cultural and geographic significance in India. To millions, this is the symbolic source of the Ganga, India's most sacred river. The town sits at around 10,000 feet on one of the few terraces suitable for habitation in a narrow glacial valley. According to local legend and scriptures, the river here descends from the mountains after being brought to earth by the goddess Ganga. Each year, pilgrims arrive from across the country, travelling through steep gorges and narrow roads to reach this remote shrine. For them, Gangotri is not simply a mountain village, it is the beginning of a story that unfolds across the entire northern Indian plain. At the heart of the town stands the Gangotri Temple. Built in the early 18th century by the regional ruler Amar Singh Thapa. The structure itself is modest compared to the grand temples of the plains, but its setting gives it a sense of quiet gravity. From Gangotri, the journey continues along the high Himalayan valleys toward another key site in the Chota Char Dham pilgrimage circuit. Kedarnath Temple, dedicated to Shiva, is believed to date back to the 8th century and is traditionally attributed to Adi Shankara. It stands on a platform of massive stone slabs built in an architectural style adapted for this unforgiving environment. The walls are thick, the structure compact, its stones fitted without mortar. Reaching Kedarnath requires effort even today. The final approach is made on foot, with a route that winds through steep forests. The journey is part of the experience, both the physical and spiritual challenges of reaching a sanctuary perched so close to the elements. The town around the temple is small and seasonal. From late spring to early autumn, it fills with pilgrims. But by winter, the temple doors are shut, and the sacred idol is ceremonially moved downhill, continuing the centuries-old tradition of seasonal worship. From its glacial origin at Gangotri, the Bhagirathi River begins a long descent through the Himalayas, picking up momentum as it flows toward the plains. By the time it reaches Rishikesh, the Ganges is no longer a narrow glacial stream, but a broad, powerful river that supports centuries of spiritual practice. The town has long been a centre for pilgrimage and religious study, where the river itself is the defining feature. Along the riverbanks, ghats, ranging from simple stone terraces to larger step platforms, are used for ritual bathing and prayers. Slightly outside the immediate town, the 13-storied Triambakeshwar temple adds a layer of historical and religious depth. Dedicated to a form of Shiva embodying 3 faces, the temple has been a centre for worship for centuries. Nearby, the Lakshman Jula suspension bridge spans the Ganges. According to local tradition, it is believed that Lakshman, the brother of Lord Rama, once crossed the river at this point on a jute rope. The present bridge was constructed in the early 20th century, carrying pedestrians across the river and linking pilgrimage routes. At almost 22,000 feet, Mount Kailash is not the tallest one in the region. Yet few places in Asia hold such concentrated cultural weight. Its 4 perfectly symmetrical faces, carved from dark, volcanic rock, reflect the austere geometry of nature itself. Unlike other mountains that invite conquest, Kailash is sacred. And climbing it is strictly forbidden. The mountain is considered the cosmic axis, the centre of the universe where heaven and earth intersect. Pilgrims often travel for weeks from distant corners of the Himalaya, Nepal and India to perform the Kora, a full 32 miles circumambulation of the mountain. Each step is measured, each breath deliberate, as devotees and travellers alike navigate rocky passes. Completing the Kora is considered a profound act of spiritual purification. Many perform it barefoot, carrying offerings, chanting prayers, or simply walking in silence. Along the route, Kailash appears eternal. Still and unchanging, an unclaimed summit that reminds of the scale and permanence of the natural world. At the foot of the mountain shimmers Lake Manasarova, mirroring the surrounding peaks. Its calm surface reflects the sky in shades of pale turquoise, deepening into emerald near the shore. Hindus believe its waters were created by Brahma and hold the power to purify sins. Buddhists associate it with spiritual clarity and meditation. For pilgrims, bathing in icy waters is a ritual, a cleansing of body, mind, and spirit. They carry offerings, circling the lake in clockwise or counterclockwise devotion, depending on what faith dictates. The rituals here are as much about physical endurance as spiritual reflection. Small monasteries dot the route, providing shelter and a sense of human presence in an otherwise immense and empty landscape. In the northernmost reaches of Nepal, Upper Mustang lies in the rain shadow of the Himalayas. The hills are dry, their colours muted and earthy, ranging from pale ochres to deep reds and browns. The soil is loose and crumbly, streaked with erosion patterns, and cliffs rise in sharp folds, forming labyrinths of ridges. Winding through these hills are trails once used by traders carrying salt from Tibet and grain from the lower valleys. Among dry mesas, the caves are perhaps the most compelling and mysterious feature. Carved directly into the cliffs, some are simple shelters, while others are expansive complexes with multiple chambers stacked atop each other. For centuries, they served multiple purposes. Meditation retreats for monks, dwellings for hermits, storage for crops. Inside, the walls are often smooth, shaped by human hands, and occasionally decorated with simple carvings. Winding through the heart of the Nepalese Himalayas, the Annapurna Circuit traces a broad arc around the Annapurna Massif. Stretching roughly 230 miles, the route passes through multiple climatic zones. From subtropical river valleys to alpine meadows and glacial ridges. The circuit begins near the town of Besisahar, where foothill villages mark the start of the ascent into the mountains. From here, the route climbs steadily through farmland and pine forests. Local monasteries punctuate the trail, offering spaces for both spiritual reflection and rest. One of the defining points of the circuit is Thorong La Pass, rising to almost 18,000 feet. The highest point on the traditional route linking the Annapurna region to the Mustang Valley and the Tibetan Plateau. Trails to the pass are carved along ridgelines and cliffs, often narrow and exposed, reflecting the natural contours of the mountains. Travellers encounter small shrines and local rituals regularly, demonstrating centuries of adaptation to both environment and belief. Modern infrastructure has eased travel along the lower portions of the circuit, yet the trail remains largely unpaved. Lodges and tea houses, often family-run, provide meals and shelter, maintaining the traditional rhythms of the route. Beyond the terraced fields of the lower Annapurna Circuit, above the tree line where oxygen thins, lies Tilicho Lake. One of the highest in the world. Nestled at roughly 16,000 feet, it is a place both fragile and formidable. A glacial basin carved by ancient ice. Reaching its shores requires determination. A trek over steep moraine, past cascading streams and snowfields. Its waters, fed by snowmelt and small glacial streams, range from deep cobalt to turquoise, reflecting the sharp ridges of surrounding peaks. Sharp ridges and glacial valleys dominate the horizon. Avalanches and landslides are constant. Local communities consider Tilicho Lake sacred. Part of a landscape intertwined with mythology and spiritual practice. Pilgrims have visited the high passes for centuries, carrying offerings and prayers, acknowledging the power of these heights. At the end of the long trek around the Annapurna Circuit, the valley opens into Pokhara, a city of a rhythm far softer than the high Himalaya. After weeks of rugged trails, Pokhara feels like a relief. Proximity to the mountains makes it a natural base for expeditions, yet it is also a city shaped by its own geography. Small temples, bustling markets, and rivers feeding into Pure Lake trace the patterns of a community that has grown alongside the mountains. At the heart of Pokhara is Pure Lake. A broad, mirror-like stretch of water that reflects the Annapurna Range with unreal clarity. Wooden boats drift across its surface, moving between the shoreline and the small island that holds Tal Barahi Temple, a focal point for local rituals. Streets are lined with guest houses and shops offering gear for the trails, yet daily life continues unchanged among the locals. The mountains are close enough to feel tangible, yet untouchable. A reminder that for all human endeavour, some landscapes remain beyond reach. For trekkers, Pokhara is both an ending and a beginning. It is a place to rest, recover, and take stock of the journey. From the towering peaks of the Himalaya, the landscape descends into the Terai Plains, where heat and humidity replace snow and altitude. Here lies Chitwan National Park, one of Nepal's most important protected areas and a striking contrast to the high mountains. It's a place where rivers meander slowly through grasslands and the jungle hums with life. A living tapestry of predator and prey. Established in 1973 as the first national park in Nepal, Chitwan was created to protect the country's rich biodiversity. The park is home to the Indian rhinoceros, a species that nearly disappeared in the mid-20th century. Conservation efforts here have brought their numbers back from the brink, allowing visitors a chance to see these armoured giants grazing in the grass. Chitwan also shelters elephants, crocodiles, even rare Bengal tigers. Each sighting feels significant, not just for its rarity, but for the delicate balance that allows these creatures to survive in a human-influenced world. After the quiet wilderness of Chitwan, the journey climbs into a valley. Where mountains give way to a patchwork of bustling streets. Kathmandu, the capital and largest city of Nepal, sits at roughly 4,600 feet above sea level. Overlooked by peaks of the distant Himalaya, ancient and modern, sacred and chaotic. Tranquil courtyards tucked amid a hum of motorcycles, rickshaws and markets. At its centre lies Durbar Square, a sprawling complex of palaces and temples that has been the heart of Nepalese power for centuries. Carved wooden windows, intricately decorated roofs, and statues of gods showcase local craftsmanship. Even after earthquakes toppled some of the older structures, reconstruction has been meticulous. Preserving artistry and the rhythm of life that define the square. Rising above the western edge of the valley is Swayambhunath, often called the Monkey Temple. Its golden stupa, topped with the all-seeing eyes of Buddha, overlooks the entire city. The climb to the temple is steep. Winding through staircases where monkeys navigate the steps as naturally as humans. Along the Bagmati River lies Pashupatinath, one of the most sacred sites in Hinduism. The temple complex is a series of pagoda-style shrines and ghats lined with cremation platforms. Here, life and death coexist visibly. Priests chant mantras, pilgrims bathe in the river, and families perform rites for the departed. A few miles east of central Kathmandu rises one of the largest stupas in the world, Bhutan. Its massive white dome is crowned with a gilded spire, and painted eyes gaze from all four sides, watching over the faithful who gather around its base. Throughout history, Bhutan has been a hub, particularly for the Tibetan diaspora that arrived after 1959. Monks, nuns, and pilgrims circulate the stupa clockwise, spinning prayer wheels, chanting mantras, and offering butter lamps. The sound of bells, drums, and whispered prayers creates a gentle, continuous rhythm that permeates the courtyard. The 2015 earthquake caused damage to its spire and surrounding structures, yet the stupa was carefully restored, preserving its role as a spiritual centre. North of Kathmandu, the capital's dense sprawl is replaced by the river-cut gateway to one of Nepal's most culturally distinct valleys, Langtang. The region sits within Nepal's first national park, established in 1976 to protect its unique mix of subtropical forests and high Himalayan terrain. The Langtang Valley trek begins in steep, forested gorges, where the Bota Koshi River churns through narrow cliffs. Along the way, settlements grew as rest points for traders and herders, modest clusters of timber lodges still carrying that same atmosphere of temporary refuge. The same earthquake that hit Kathmandu caused a massive landslide that swept through Langtang village, destroying it almost entirely. Only one building survived. Further up the valley sits Kyanjin Gompa, named after the small Buddhist monastery established here centuries ago. It once served as a spiritual and cultural anchor for herders scattered across the high meadows. The journey along the most popular trek in Nepal, from Kathmandu to Everest Base Camp, begins not on a trail, but in the air. In less than an hour, the plane leaves behind the dense hills and terraced farmland surrounding the capital and traces a path northeast toward Lukla Airport. Lukla sits at roughly 9,300 feet, and its airport, officially Tenzing Hillary Airport, is unlike any other in the world. Built in the 1960s with the help of Sherpa communities who levelled the hillside by hand. The runway measures just over 1,700 feet long. It is slanted uphill at nearly a 12% gradient, allowing aircraft to slow rapidly during landing and accelerate during takeoff. One end of the runway ends at a steep mountain slope. The other drops away into a deep valley. There are no second chances here. Pilots commit fully, landing in a single, decisive move. Weather delays are common as clouds, wind and shifting visibility all disrupt schedules. This isn't drama. It's simply the practical reality of flying in the Himalayas. Where aviation is shaped by the terrain as much as technology. From Lukla, the trail to Namche Bazaar follows a glacier-fed torrent that cuts a narrow corridor through the valley. Suspension bridges rise above the water, layered with rows of prayer flags that snap against the cold air. Trekkers share the path with porters carrying loads that defy belief, and with long trains of yaks moving at their own unhurried pace. Namche sits at around 11,300 feet. Cradled in a natural amphitheatre carved out of the hillside. It's the most important acclimatization stop on the way to base camp. Virtually every trekking itinerary pauses here for at least one extra night. The town is built for this purpose. Dozens of lodges, medical posts familiar with altitude symptoms, and well-marked acclimatization hikes. One of the most common routes climbs to the Everest View Hotel, perched at around 12,700 feet. Giving trekkers a chance to gain altitude and return to sleep lower, an essential strategy in these mountains. From Namche, the trail continues toward Tengboche Monastery, a centre of Sherpa life surrounded by some of the most iconic peaks in the Himalayas. Even before you step through its gates, the setting alone makes it clear why this place has held spiritual authority for over a century. Founded in 1916, the monastery belongs to the Nyingma school of Tibetan Buddhism, the oldest of the four major traditions. Sherpa families from villages across the valley maintain close ties here. Many send their sons to study as novice monks. An earthquake destroyed the original structure in 1934, and a fire burned it again in 1989. Each time, the community rebuilt it, largely through local effort and support from trekkers, restoring the hand-painted murals and the intricate woodwork. Beyond the monastery, the path leads toward the ultimate emblem of the Himalayas. Mount Everest. At 29,000 feet, it is the highest point on Earth. The first confirmed ascent was made by Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay in 1953. A feat that instantly became part of modern human myth. The South Base Camp, at about 17,600 feet, serves as a hub of activity in the spring climbing season. Colourful tents dot the moraine, each one a temporary home for climbers, guides and support teams. From here, expeditions move upward through a series of camps, each higher and more exposed than the last. Above 26,000 feet, they enter what mountaineers call the death zone. Oxygen levels here drop to roughly a third of what they are at sea level. Decisions must be made slowly and deliberately. Every step costs energy, every breath counts. For those who reach the summit, the achievement comes not only from skill and preparation, but from enduring conditions that few other places on Earth can replicate. On the trails leading toward Everest, the presence of yaks is constant, steady, unhurried, and absolutely essential. These animals are the real backbone of the region's logistics, carrying the weight of an entire trekking and expedition industry on their wool-covered shoulders. At altitude, where the air thins and every step feels heavier, yaks do the work that no machine can manage. They haul tents, food, gas cylinders, ropes, ice screws, and dozens of other pieces of gear that climbers depend on once they reach base camp. Much of what appears as a modern mountaineering operation exists only because a yak carried it up a narrow trail, often for days at a time. A single animal can haul well over 150 pounds in terrain where a human load has to be carefully rationed to prevent altitude illness. Visitors often mistake Dzong yak cattle hybrids for true yaks on the lower parts of the trail. Purebred yaks prefer the colder upper zones and overheat easily below about 12,000 feet. The hybrids take over the mid-elevations, forming a seamless logistical chain that reaches all the way from Lukla to Everest Base Camp. After the high peaks and glacial rivers of Nepal, we turn southward toward the rolling hills of Darjeeling. Perched at roughly 6,700 feet, This hill station is famous less for altitude than for the scent of tea leaves drying in the sun. Darjeeling tea plantations are the heart of the region, both economically and culturally. Introduced by the British in the 19th century, tea quickly transformed the local economy. The hills are dotted with neatly aligned bushes. Each slope is a mosaic of workers plucking the tender two leaves and a bud that produce the delicate muscatel-flavoured tea the region is known for. Complementing the landscape is the Darjeeling Himalayan Railway. A narrow gauge track often called the toy train. Constructed in the late 1800s, this engineering feat climbs steep slopes and navigates tight hairpin curves. Steam engines, some more than a century old, still puff along the tracks, offering travellers a slow journey through misty valleys. Meanwhile, in Bhutan, Takchang Monastery, better known as Tiger's Nest, is perched on cliffs over the Paro Valley. At roughly 10,000 feet, the monastery clings to a granite wall some 3,000 feet above the valley floor. Constructing a complex on a vertical cliff in the 17th century required courage and communal effort. Materials were carried on foot, and local knowledge of the rock ensured that the monastery could withstand the elements over centuries. The name comes from legend. In the 8th century, a revered Buddhist master is said to have flown to this site on the back of a tigress to subdue local spirits. Since then, Tiger's Nest has grown into a spiritual heart of the kingdom. Despite its fame, the climb to reach it preserves a sense of reverence. The trail winds through a forest of rhododendron and bamboo, passes prayer wheels and mani stones etched with mantras. The monastery maintains its sense of seclusion and spiritual purpose. Photography is limited in inner sanctums, and silence is a requirement in many areas. Down in the valley, Punaka Dzong rests on water and open space. Not only an important monastery, but the former seat of the Bhutanese government. Its name translates to the Palace of Great Happiness, and even at first sight, the meaning feels literal. Bhutanese dzongs are fortresses as well as monasteries, a blend of administrative and spiritual life. Punaka's location at the meeting of two rivers was strategic for defence, but it also carries deep symbolism. The twin currents represent compassion and wisdom, two fundamental aspects of Buddhist philosophy flowing together at a place of governance and ritual. Inside, courtyards open onto assembly halls decorated with murals. And the central tower, or Utse, rises above the complex as a spiritual anchor. Punaka Dzong has witnessed many defining moments in Bhutan's history, including the coronation of the first king in 1907, marking the unification of the country under a hereditary monarchy. Bamboo groves in Bhutan host red pandas. A species most visitors know exists, but few ever see. They live in the lower and mid-altitude forests, usually between 7,000 and 12,000 feet. Despite their name, red pandas are not closely related to the giant panda. They belong to their own unique evolutionary branch. They feed mostly on young bamboo shoots, supplemented by berries, blossoms, and the occasional insect. Their curved claws and flexible ankles let them descend trees head first. One of the few mammals capable of doing so. The species is vulnerable, threatened by habitat loss and climate pressures that push bamboo forests higher up the slopes. In national parks across the Himalaya, conservation programs focus on protecting these habitats and reducing disturbances from livestock and settlements. From the bamboo forests of Bhutan, our route drifts into a different corner of the Himalayas. Ningchi, in the southeastern part of the Tibetan Plateau. Here, at elevations far lower than central Tibet, the landscape softens. The mountains are still immense, but the valleys feel almost temperate. And each spring, Ningchi becomes known for something unusual at this altitude. Peach blossoms. While the plateau is famous for its harsh winds and thin air, Ningchi's location along the river creates a sheltered microclimate. Temperatures are milder, rain is more frequent, and the growing season is longer. This allows peach trees to flourish. When the blossoms arrive, the valley shifts into an almost surreal palette. Pale pinks and soft whites spreading across fields. Yet spring in Ningchi is brief. Within weeks, petals scatter across farm paths. And the fields transition to shades of green and yellow. The blossoms disappear almost as suddenly as they came, leaving behind a memory of colour on a landscape that will soon return to its usual high-altitude calm. As we climb back onto the high plateau, the air thins and the world becomes overwhelmingly vast. At more than 14,500 feet above sea level lies Yamdrok Tso. A place where the terrain feels almost lunar, except for the colour of the water. Yamdrok is one of the 4 great holy lakes of Tibetan Buddhism. And many pilgrims believe it is a spiritual life force of the region. Monasteries dot the ridgelines around it, including Samding, historically led by one of the few female reincarnate lamas. Tradition holds that the lake is shaped like a massive scorpion. Its long, branching arms stretching through the plateau's folds. The surrounding slopes are home to herders who graze sheep and yaks on patches of tough alpine grass. Small villages sit near the shore where freshwater streams enter the lake. And fishing, rare on much of the plateau, provides an additional source of livelihood. The lake's colour changes through the day, deep blue in the morning, vivid turquoise at noon, and muted jade as clouds roll in from the south. Shigatse, Tibet's second largest city and a historic crossroads of religion and trade, sits at roughly 12,800 feet. Its identity is closely tied to Tashilhunpo Monastery, one of the most important monastic institutions in Tibetan Buddhism. Founded in 1447, it grew into the seat of the Panchen Lama, the second highest ranking Lama in the Gelug school. Massive golden roofs dominate the hillside, rising above whitewashed walls and a maze of chapels. Shigatse's streets still carry echoes of its role as a trade hub. But above both town and monastery looms another landmark, the Shigatse Dzong, or Shigatse Fortress. Perched on a rocky ridge, it served as a regional administrative stronghold and the traditional home of the local governors known as the Dizis. In Lhasa, another fortress, the Potala Palace, rises above the streets like a vast stone ridge. Part monastery, part memory of an older Tibet. From a distance, its white and red walls seem to grow directly out of the hill, an anchor point in a wide valley. Up close, the scale becomes clearer. Thick walls, narrow windows, long staircases climbing in slow, deliberate tiers. For centuries, this was the winter residence of the Dalai Lamas and the centre of a system where religious authority and political leadership were intertwined. The Red Palace, the spiritual core, holds chapels filled with golden stupas of past Dalai Lamas and shelves of carefully wrapped scriptures. In contrast, the White Palace once housed offices and living quarters, simpler rooms, but still part of the same immense structure that seems to fold endlessly into itself. From the upper terraces, the old streets of Lhasa spread outward in a pattern shaped by centuries of pilgrimage and ritual. Built mainly in the 17th century, but rooted in a much older foundation, the Potala Palace is a layered record of Tibetan life. In the end, the Himalayas resist simple conclusions. They're too vast, too layered, too old for that. Stretching across 5 countries and rising to the highest point on Earth, these mountains have shaped cultures that couldn't have grown anywhere else. Here, altitude dictates everything. How people move, what they eat, what they build, and even how they understand the world. Life bends to the terrain, not the other way around. For travellers, the Himalayas feel like an invitation into a world that's familiar in some ways and completely foreign in others. And even now, after centuries of pilgrims, traders, climbers and wanderers, the Himalayas still feel like a frontier. Not because they're untouched, but because they challenge everyone who visits.